Hello again, followers. This story is, once again, a massive undertaking. While I twiddle away at finishing these long projects I have this month, please enjoy what I've finished thus far. Precautionarily, viewer discretion is advised. Thank you for listening, and enjoy, my fellow members and Patreons. Now, let's delve into the dark together. Part 1. Tom Herriman didn't know why he fell so deeply in love with the house on Chestnut Street. But love is a funny thing, isn't it? Once Cupid's arrow pierces your heart, ration, logic, and reason go right out the window. A two-story Cape Cod at the junction of two quiet streets lined with leafy oak trees and cast-iron lamps, it was what the realtor charitably referred to as a fixer-upper. The wooden shakes in which it was sided, so much like a fish's layered scales, were grey and rotting, shings peeled back from the roof like flecks of dead skin, and the back deck sagged as if under the weight of years. Inside, the smell of musk lingered on the stale air, the linoleum in the kitchen crackled underfoot, and water stains from a leak in the attic splotched the second-floor ceiling. The yard was overgrown and dense bushes pressed tight to the north and south walls. The last owner, an old lady in her 70s who had lived there since the 1970s, died 3 years ago, and it had sat empty ever since. "The kids in town say it's haunted," the realtor said cautiously, as if revealing a great and terrible secret. A tall woman with carrot-colored hair and a fire-truck red smile. She wore a red blazer and clutched a folder protectively to her crotch. They were standing in the sun-washed kitchen on a golden Saturday afternoon in early August, the cool, bright kinds that hit at the temperate days of September. Tom's wife, Julia, methodically went through the cabinets looking for signs of mice, and Tom squinted into the corners where the walls met the ceiling. Cobwebs danced in a breeze Tom could not feel, and that damp, mildewy odor caressed his nose like the scent of a cheap woman with cheaper virtues. "I believe it," he had said. Walking by on the narrow sidewalk, anyone with any imagination at all would think 625 was home to ghosts, goblins, and possibly vampires, too. It reminded Tom of a house in the town where he grew up. Boys used to dare each other to run up the walk and ring the bell. Legend had it that if they did, a ghost would throw open the door, grab your wrist, and drag you in, which he'd either eat or assault you. Its intent changed as the youthful tellers grew older and dirtier. Being a grown man with a level head and the computer science degree to back it up, Tom didn't believe in ghosts. The scariest thing he and Julia, a commercial artist, had encountered so far were leaky pipes, peeling wallpaper, and a few daddy-long-legs nested in one of the bedroom closets. The house was flooded twice, per the realtor, once in 1977 and again in 1994. And there was a minor termite problem in 2010. Those things alone would normally have been enough to make Tom raise his hands, palms out. But despite it all, he liked the place, especially the antique features. The clawfoot bathtubs and pull-chain toilets were pretty darn cool, if you asked him. Maybe it was the visionary part of him, but Tom could vividly picture the house as it would be once he and Julia moved in. Warm, cozy, and sepia tones like a comfortable old photograph. The big room at the end of the second-floor hall would be perfect for their daughter, Megan, and the finished basement would make a neat, rumpus room with a little spit and elbow grease. Another consideration was the location. Appalachian County Middle, where Megan would attend classes if they moved in, was 4 short blocks to the west, and Ridgewood Park, a vast expanse of playgrounds, walking trails, and duck ponds, lay just 10 minutes to the east. Rossville itself was the kind of place Tom had always wanted to raise a family in, with its quaint brick stone fronts, horizontal parking spaces, and small-town charm. When he first laid eyes on it, he was instantly put in mind of a Norman Rockwell painting. "Ooh, this is nice," Julia marveled from the passenger seat, her big green eyes widened to take it all in. That was high praise coming from her. Short and fiery red hair and enchanting cat's eyes that made Tom's heartbeat quicken every time he gazed into them. Julia was typically an intelligent and easygoing woman, but she had been uncharacteristically rigid and hypercritical during their 6 months of house hunting. Tom could hardly fault her. She wanted everything to be perfect, and so did he. Even though he was 41 and she was 38, they were really just beginning their life together. Biology had long denied them a baby of their own, and finally they agreed to adopt. Early last year, they visited a facility in Mountain View and instantly fell in love with a little girl wearing big, dorky glasses and stumbling over her feet with every step. Thin and wispy, with dull blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail and clad in a cute floral dress. Megan came right up to them and held out her hand.
Hi, I'm Megan, and I fall down a lot.
She was bright, funny, and so adorable that we decided right then and there to adopt her. It was a long process, filled with red tape, paperwork, and lots of visits by social workers, but in the end, it all paid off. They'd never been happier, and even though they'd been married nearly 20 years, it felt like they were newlyweds all over again. This, they figured, would be the perfect time to buy their dream home. Like adoption, however, home buying isn't a simple matter. They'd look at every Foursquare, Frame, and Victorian in West Virginia, but nothing quite grabbed them and said, "Buy me, losers." Until the Cape Cod. Standing there, wrapped in air as warm as wool fresh from the dryer, and communing with the house like a seer with the spirit world, Tom felt the same stirring in his chest that he felt when he first met Megan. It wasn't as sharp or as sudden, but promised to blossom over time until it consumed him, just as wholly as his love for his daughter. Julia was smitten as well, but not quite as much as him. "It's going to take a lot of work," she said that night in bed. The amber glowing of the bedside lamp cast her face partly in shadows, her lovely and delicate features taking on a campfire ghost story air. "Like, a lot." "I know," he said with a nod of acquiescence. "But even so, it's still pretty great." She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. Yeah, it's nice," she admitted. "And the price." The price was well below market value, and even after they'd put in the necessary work, they'd still have gotten it all at a steal. "Megan will love it," he said, to sway her even further. "Do you see that backyard? It's huge." Julia laughed in that melodic way of hers, the way Tom had come to crave, like a flower craves water and sunlight. "As far as the backyard goes, it is pretty big." "We can get a dog," he pointed out. "A golden retriever?" She pursed her lips in thought. "Every family needs a dog." Her lips spread into a big, happy smile, and her face positively glowed. She had long wanted a family, perhaps more than Tom, and every mention of their finally having one made her beam. "What do you say?" he asked. She took a deep breath through her nose and made a show of considering his proposal. Tom arched a faux critical brow, and she laughed. "I say, let's get a dog," she said. Then, "and the house." They signed the paperwork on August 25th and told Megan that morning at breakfast that they would be moving. "We're moving?" she asked with a hint of apprehension. She sat at the table with a bowl of cereal in front of her and a marble notebook sitting nearby. Julia had been teaching her to draw, and she was catching on quick. She looked small and far younger than her dozen years, like a duckling that hadn't kept pace with its siblings and was hopelessly behind. Her records were partially sealed by court order, and Tom knew very little about her origins, but she was born prematurely and given up for adoption instantly, which accounted, he supposed, for her small stature. In his darker moments, he thought it was because she didn't get enough love and nurturing in those group homes the state stuck her in. A child needed love the way a plant needed water, and like a plant, if a child doesn't get what it needs, it wilts. "We are," Julia said with endless love and patience. Megan had been with them since January. She was shy at first, hesitating to call them Mom and Dad and this home hers. There was no clearer sign of this to Tom than her never taking her shoes off. In the beginning, she would leave her shoes on all day, except when she took a bath and went to bed. She came out of her room every morning in her kids, even when she was still in her PJs, and would not take them off again. Julia was the first one to realize why. "She still isn't entirely comfortable here," she said defeatedly. That made sense. The places where Megan had grown up were cold, tiled, and institutional. This wasn't like those. This was her home, and though it was such a small thing, it bothered him that she couldn't fully relax. By the beginning of April, however, she was starting to come out in just her socks, and Tom and Julia counted that as a huge win. All that to say, she was comfortable here, and as expected, the idea of moving, of being pulled away from where she was beginning to settle, upset her. "To a really nice house a few towns over," Julia continued. "And we're getting a dog." Megan blinked in confusion, the 1-2 punch knocking her off kilter. "A dog?" Her lips pulled back from her teeth in a big, excitable grimace that made even Tom's jaw ache. "What kind? What's his name? Can we play fetch with him? I never played fetch with a dog, except for the one time at the park, but when he came running back, he knocked me over and I got a concussion, so I don't remember it too well." She squinted one eye in thought, completely oblivious to her parents' amused smiles. "Actually, it may have been 2 dogs. We were thinking a golden retriever," Julia said. "What kind of dog is that?" Megan asked, bemused. Julia took out her iPhone, brought up Google Images, and handed it to Megan, whose brow furrowed analytically. She looked at the screen and brightened. "Oh, hey, these dogs are cute. Look, this one's a puppy. Can we get a puppy one?" "Just as soon as we move in," Julia assured her. That afternoon, the 3 of them piled into Tom's car, a red 2019 Dodge Caravan with a sliding rear door, and drove to the U-Haul rental agency in Stanton. The man Tom spoke to was fat, with a bad comb-over and teeth as big and square as chiclets. He rented Tom the biggest model they had, the one with the extended 26-foot cargo hold, and thanked him for his business. Their house, a 1-story, 3-bedroom ranch on a parcel of land backed to a graded slope falling away from I-80, was packed with more memories than personal possessions, and it took Tom 2 days to load the truck. Megan volunteered to help, and watched her struggle with boxes as big as she was made Tom smile. At one point, she dropped one onto the lawn and the flaps popped open, spilling kitchenwares across the grass. She stared forlornly down at it and heaved a big, shoulder-shaking sigh. "I tried my best," she said, "and it just wasn't good enough." Coming over and standing next to her, Tom slipped his arm around her shoulders and drew her close. Her feet tangled, and she threw out her arms to steady herself. "Whoops. Sorry, hon." "Sometimes it's not," he said, hoping to sound wise and sage. "What matters is that you do try." She meditated on his words a moment, then stooped down and started to sweep the things back in. "I just hope I didn't break anything." On their last night in the house, they slept in sleeping bags on the living room floor, their makeshift beds in a rough circle around a single Coleman lantern that sent shadows flickering across the walls. The place was empty, and every loud noise echoed, which, for some reason, unnerved Tom. Houses aren't supposed to be desolate. They're supposed to be filled with joy, laughter, and things. Since all the dishes were buried somewhere in the truck, they ordered pizza from Papa John's and ate it over an intense game of Uno. Megan, though bookish and cerebral, could get mighty competitive. And when she played, brother, she played to win. She hit him with 3 draw 4s in a row, then flashed a terse smirk at his genuine horror. "Let's see you win now," she said. "I can't," Tom cried. "I just picked up 12 cards. And the excuse factory is open for business," she said with an eye roll. In the end, neither of them won. Julia laid down her last card and broke into a mocking victory dance that would have earned a red flag had she done it on a football field. Tom and Megan exchanged a glance, then Tom shook his head. "I think you made your point," he told his wife. Later, Megan snuggled up in her sleeping bag with her favorite stuffed animal, a plush rabbit with a carrot emblazoned across his white, furry chest, and Tom knelt over to kiss her forehead. "I love you, honey," he said, and he had never meant any declaration more.
I love you too, Dad,
she said, and no title had ever pleased him more. Next, Julia kissed her and brushed the little girl's hair lovingly back from her forehead.
"Sweet dreams, Bug."
"I'll try," Megan said.
"You too."
Later, when Megan's breathing had slowed, signifying sleep, Tom took his wife into his arms and held her close, his nose burying in her hair and imbuing its clean fragrance. Tomorrow, they were moving into their new home with their new daughter, and everything was right in the world. Julia spoke, breaking the tranquil silence, and Tom realized that he was beginning to doze.
"I hope she adjusts okay."
There was a hint of worry in her voice. "I'm sure she will," Tom said and drew her closer. "She's adaptable." He said that admiringly. From what he knew, Megan had never suffered abuse or neglect, but even so, she'd dealt with a lot in her young life, from lacking the love and warmth of parents to living with 10 other kids, most of whom had behavioral problems and picked on her. She was no worse for the wear. Indeed, she was probably even better off for it. She had known and surmounted adversity, and that, more than anything else, built character. And Megan had a lot of character. He said as much, and Julia sighed deeply.
"I know,"
she started.
"I just worry. What if she doesn't do well in Rossville?"
"She will," Tom vowed. "We'll all do well." Julia turned in his arms and searched his eyes for traces of deceit, and when she found none, she offered a tiny, closed-lipped smile. She held up her hand, pinky extended.
"Pinky promise?"
"Pinky promise," he laughed, and hooked his pinky around hers. Things might not be perfect in Rossville, but they would be as close as they could get. Of that, Tom was certain. Part 2. When life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. Or lemon meringue pie, maybe. Sitting in the back of the caravan on the morning of August 29th, her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Bob, perched on her lap. Megan stared out the window at the passing countryside and scrunched her lips from one side to the other, a nervous tic she didn't even realize she had until people started making fun of her for it. She tried to not do it, but hey, might as well try not to be half blind without her glasses, right? Tom and Julia, calling them Mom and Dad still felt kind of weird, but good, too, if that makes sense, chatted in the front, and music whispered from the speaker next to Megan's head. Mr. Bob, named because he looked kind of like a bob, gazed sightlessly ahead, a toothy smile frozen to his furry face. And though Megan obviously knew he wasn't real, she pretended that he was just as edgy as she was. It made her feel better to not be alone. They were following a winding 2-lane highway through 2 foothills, and every so often a sign flashed by, the distance to Rossville closing a little at a time. 20 miles, then 15, then 10. With each revolution of the van's tires, the anxious churning in the pit of her stomach increased, until she was one rough jostle away from hurling. The air in the van, cold because the AC was on, was impossibly hot now, and breathing was a little difficult. It was almost like the asthma attacks she had when she was little, the chest tight, lungs aching, head swimming. If she didn't know any better, she'd say she was going to launch into one. But she outgrew those years ago. And thank goodness, because they suck. She did her best to not show how messed up she was, and, not to brag, she thought she was doing a pretty good job of it. Her reflection in the window was drawn, but not a queasy shade of green. So, when there, her slender fingers picked absently at Mr. Bob's fur like a Catholic praying the rosary for strength, and one foot jittered a restless jig. You'd think that with all the times she'd been the new girl, she'd be used to it, but you'd be very wrong. Very, very wrong. Oh, she was accustomed to it, sure,
but it still made her a little weak in the knees. See, every time she'd done this before, she went in with high hopes, promising herself that things would be different this time. No one was going to call her names or bully her, and guess what? Things were never different. The other girls, usually all older than her, were always B words, and the staff was always authoritarian H words, H here meaning Hitler's. Every new start led to the same old pratfalls as the last one, and no matter what she did, she wound up being unhappy. But things really were different now. She had 2 parents who were pretty great. Don't tell them that, or it might go to their heads. And soon, they'd be getting a dog. With all that stuff, could she be nervous? Could she really? Yes. Yes, she could. In the group homes, anonymity was her best friend. When you blend in, there's less of a chance people will pick on you. Starting a new school, well, how much more conspicuous can you get? Walking through the doors on the first day, she'd stand out like a big, yucky sore thumb. Might as well wear a flashing neon sign that says, "Hi everyone, look at me. Wahoo, brand spankin' new." That was just her pessimism rearing its ugly head again. The same pessimism that she swore off when Tom and Julia adopted her. Gee, she thought, as she sat in this very spot on that first glorious ride to her new home. Things are sure looking up. Maybe she didn't think in those exact words, but the spirit was the same. And for the first time in a long time, as she could remember, she allowed herself a spark of hope. A spark that turned into something bigger over those first few months. She was happy, and she learned something about herself. She liked being happy. Cynicism, therefore, had no place in her life any longer. No, none. Goodbye. See ya. You are not welcome here anymore, buddy. She just had to think positive. Things aren't always bleak and glum and all that other stuff, so why act like they were? She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice Julia twisting around in her seat to look at her. "You excited?" Megan's head bobbed up and down just a little too quickly, her ponytail tickling the back of her neck. "Yep," she said. "Really excited." Her voice sounded shaky to her own ears, and she searched her mind for something to qualify her statement. "I can't wait to see my room. It has a nice view," Tom said, and flicked his eyes to the rearview mirror. Julia nodded her agreement. "The way the sunlight filters through the trees outside the window is really pretty." A few miles later, the hillock running along the southbound shoulder fell away, and Rossville appeared in the valley below. The thin summer haze lent it a dreamlike quality, putting her in mind of theatrical backdrops painted on canvas. A wide, still river defined its northern border, and thick forest spread away in the south, the terrain gradually getting steeper and steeper until it officially entered mountain territory. Narrow streets dotted with trees ran east to west. A green church steeple towered from a stand of trees, and a red brick schoolhouse looked down from a hill like a strict headmaster keeping watch over his rambunctious flock. In the distance, the blue mountains separating Virginia from West Virginia melded with the dusty, azure sky. Megan's jaw dropped as she pressed her face to the window. It looked like something from one of the books she read. She swept her gaze left to right, picking out every little detail. "It's pretty," she said earnestly. "That's what I said," Julia commented. Rossville reminded Megan of a postcard you'd find in a gift shop. The kind that people buy and send home because they're just that picturesque. When she was in the group home, she imagined living in a place like this, and being here now as the highway curved to the left and then down to the green truss bridge over the river. Her chest clutched in pleasant anticipation. The roiling nerves faded away, and in its place came the giddy excitement she just moments ago claimed but didn't actually feel. She liked the house on 181. Liked her school and the few acquaintances she's made. She couldn't really call them friends since she didn't get to know them too well, but something told her she'd like it here even more. The bridge carried the road across the river, and Megan craned her neck to see the water through the framework. It swirled, rippled, and eddied around jutting rocks. And along either shore, fallen tree trunks broke the surface like prehistoric bones. A couple of men fished from one muddy bank, and further down, a group of shirtless boys splashed in the shallow water. "Perfect for swimming," Julia pointed out. Megan didn't really like swimming. but if there was a big, shady tree surrounded by soft grass to sit in, it would make the best reading spot ever, with the lulling chug of the river, the quiet rustle of the warm breeze slipping through the trees, and the warming light of the sun. Oh, Mama, that sounded nice. In town, Route 29 turned into Main Street and flowed past low brick buildings screened behind well-manicured trees. The bank here, the barber shop there, town hotel, feed store, cafe. Everything a small town should have as far as Megan was concerned. People in light, summery clothes made their way up and down the sidewalks, on errands or just enjoying the weather, and Megan studied them as the caravan rolled past. They looked okay, but Megan's hackles were up, and when that happened, she was like a dog that wouldn't trust you until it sniffed your hand and made double sure you were nice. People, she had learned, can be kind or mean sometimes, but they could also be pretty great sometimes, like Tom and Julia. Gotta look on the bright side, Meg. Stop being such a gloomy Gus. Jeez. At the corner of Main and Pine, Tom turned left. A gang of teenagers stood against a brick wall, texting on their phones and talking, while a boy in a knit cap and an AC/DC band shirt did kickflips on a skateboard. On the right, a man-sized door stood open. Inside, it was a pit of shadows from which loomed clunky things like filing cabinets. When he saw the single word above the entrance, white on faded red, she understood. Huh, Julia said, with evident interest. They have an arcade. Do they? Tom asked and glanced over, but they were already past. I wonder if they have laser tag. Once a month, sometimes twice, Tom and Julia took Megan to the Chuck E. Cheese in Harrisonburg for a night of pizza, games, and ducking from the kind of sort of scary mouse-suited mascot. She wasn't very good at some of the games, like skee-ball. Skee-ball was the enemy, but she dominated at laser tag. She was so good, in fact, that she let Tom and Julia be on the same team, so they had a fighting chance. Julia hummed thoughtfully. It looks a little small for laser tag, she said, then looked in the rearview mirror. We can check it out later if you want. Sure, Megan said. She was already itching to explore Rossville. No one would instantly recognize her as new just walking around, and if they did, well, like SpongeBob said, a stranger is just a friend you haven't met yet. Huh. Yeah. Let's go with that. Better than thinking they're a bully you haven't met yet. But to be entirely fair, she'd known more bullies than she had Tom and Julia's. A lot more. They turned onto Chestnut Street, and Megan shoved that thought aside. Big, spreading chestnut trees from which the lane derived its name overhung the pavement, sunlight falling through their boughs and dappling the asphalt with golden coins of summer brilliance. A woman in black yoga pants and a white tank top walked a shaggy dog along the sidewalk, and Megan turned to look. Its mouth hung open and its tongue flapped in the wind, making her giggle. That reminded her. When can we go to the pond? She asked. Tomorrow, Julia said at length. I guess. She looked at Tom for confirmation, and he nodded. I don't see why not. The house, a 2-story Cape Cod with grimy windows and a single dormer, and shaded in a mix of wooden shakes and weathered gray half-rounds, stood out an overgrown corner lot, unruly bushes growing along one wall. A chain-link fence chest-high to Megan enclosed the front yard, and a splintered wood stockade fence of similar height wrapped around the back. A brief porch provided access to the front door, and a flagstone walk led to the gate, beside which a crooked mailbox leaned heavily to one side, like a stooping old man resting after a long day of being elderly. Shingles peeled back from the roof, one wavering in a strong breeze as if in sarcastic welcome, and the brick chimney rising into the heavens was so scoured by the elements that it looked like it would fall over if you so much as breathed on it. What she could see of the cement foundation seemed okay, if you ignored the moldy green stuff. Megan's brow knitted as Tom turned onto the side street, and she cocked her head to one side as if to rattle her brain into working properly. Okay, she had no right to complain about anything, which is why she never did, out loud, but why is this house all corpsey? From the way Tom and Julia talked about it, it was basically a mansion. The little bungalow in front of her, on the other hand, was not. A gravel alleyway bordered by tall wooden fences and lined with trash cans abutted the backyard. A lot big enough to fit 2 cars served as a driveway, and a tumble-down detached garage with 2 green-painted doors huddled beneath a giant oak tree on the right, its side window crisscrossed by thin vines that reminded Megan of the arteries on a cross-section of the human body. Tom cut the engine, and dust hung in the air around the caravan like smoke. "Here we are," he said.
It's nice,"
Megan fumbled. "It's a fixer-upper," Julia said in the rearview mirror. "It's going to take some work, but on the plus side, we get to decorate it from the ground up." Tom unclasped his seatbelt. "We'll start in your room. We can design it any way you want." Any way she wanted, huh?
"Can I have one of those window seat thingies to read in?"
she asked hopefully. "You sure can," Tom said. "And built-in bookshelves if you want them." That could be nice. She had to see her room before she made any major decisions, though. Like Julia taught her in regards to drawing, every scene has its own character, and to keep in harmony with said character, you don't add anything to disrupt that character. Throwing open their doors, they got out and stretched their legs. The gritty early afternoon heat swaddled itself around Megan like a dissected hand, and the dry breeze blew dirt into her glasses and mouth, making her gag. A hushed pall hung over the neighborhood, broken only by the distant whine of a lawnmower. The tang of freshly cut grass found Megan's nose, and she drew a big breath only to choke on more dust. "Ugh, it's in my lungs." She fisted her hands to her mouth and coughed deeply. "You all right?" Tom asked with a touch of concern.
"Just getting used to the air,"
she lied. Tom arched his brow. "It's the same air as the old house."
"Could have fooled me."
A wooden gate with rusted metal hinges and a shattered latch opened into the backyard. The grass reached Megan's knees and teemed with late summer grasshoppers. One landed on the back of her hand, and she lifted it to her face in order to inspect it more closely. Maybe she was a weirdo, but grasshoppers were kind of cute. Until they spit on you, which this one did in short order. "All right then, back you go." She flicked it off with her finger and climbed the steps. They creaked under her feet, and nails' heads that had worked themselves loose tore at her keds. A glass patio table anchored by a big canvas umbrella, riddled with tears, occupied a space immediately to the right of the back door, and a couple plastic lawn chairs sat in an uneven row, inviting the meek and weary to come have a seat, and probably fall when the fragile legs gave out. "First thing we have to do," Julia said, "is cut this grass. What time did Jason say he'd be here?" Tom thought for a second. 12:30, but knowing him, more like 1:30. Jason was Jason Turner, Tom's best friend. Tom was, to put it nicely, kind of straight-laced. He always wore his shirts tucked in and followed all the rules to the letter. Jason was the complete opposite. He was like the fun uncle who let you stay up all night eating ice cream and chocolate bars, but when the time came to be serious, you couldn't exactly rely on him. Not because he was bad or anything. He was just basically a big kid himself, and not a particularly responsible one at that. Before they left the old house that morning, Tom hooked Julia's Prius to the U-Haul and put Jason in charge of bringing it over, since driving such a big truck made him nervous, and Jason had experience handling honkin' big land whales. Megan was just a teensy-weensy bit leery. All her stuff was in the truck, and who's to say Jason wouldn't wreck it playing chicken with another car or something? She could totally see him doing that. "As soon as he gets here, I'm cutting the grass," Julia said. "God only knows what's in it." Probably snakes, spiders, and vampires. Megan saw this movie in the group home once where a vampire popped up out of a really tall grass and attacked this boy, and it scared her so bad she peed a little. Vampires aren't real, though. Snakes, on the other hand. "I'll do it," Tom offered. "I just want to get some of the furniture in first." He came up the stairs, fished the keys out of his pocket, and cycled through them while Megan stood on the sidelines looking up at the kitchen window. Fingerprints, probably older than she was, smudged the glass, and dead bugs clung to the screen. Tom found the right key, inserted it into the lock, and opened the door. He went in, and Megan followed, braced for it to be just as messed up inside as it was out. It wasn't, thankfully. The floor, yellow linoleum, was cracked in places and popped beneath her tread. but it looked clean. Floral paper covered the walls, ripped here and there, and to her left, a bulky old refrigerator stood next to the countertop. Ahead, an open archway led into the dining room and the living room beyond, both of which seethed with shadows cast by the wavering foliage without. Megan sniffed the air like a tiny field mouse for hints of danger, and her nose crinkled at the pungent scent of mildew. Ew. It wasn't overpowering, but you know how sometimes a blunt edge hurts worse than a keen one? It was slight, but the more it clawed at her senses, the more off-putting it became. Julia slipped in from the deck and closed the door behind her. She tested the light switch, and the overhead light came on with a low electrical sound. "Power's on," she said.
It kind of stinks in here,
Megan said, which was the most critical assessment she would allow herself. You don't look a gift horse in the mouth, and her entire life right now was a gift horse. A gift horse with a really bad breath. In the middle of the room, Tom sighed and nodded. "Yeah, it does, but we'll take care of it. Want to see your room?" Well, she did, but now she was a little apprehensive. If it was anything like the kitchen.
"Sure,"
she said. The stairs were off the dining room and through a door that hung askance on hinges that weren't much better than the ones outside. The treads were bare wood, and the plaster constituting the two close walls were stained yellow with nicotine. Light cascaded through a window at the top, but it barely reached down here, leaving most of the stairwell in gloom. Gulp. She suddenly wished she didn't leave Mr. Bob in the car. For a moment, her resolve flagged. Then she steeled it and started up, her fingers trailing the wooden handrail and her little heart beginning to pound. Dust motes swirled around her like phantoms and tickled her nose, and pausing halfway up, she sneezed. Yeah, she already missed the old house. What did Tom and Julia call this? Their dream home? A bad dream, maybe. Sweat sheened her face, and her glasses began to slip. She pushed them up her nose and went on. At the top, she rounded the newel post and stopped. 3 doors opened off the hall, every one of them standing open. To the left was Tom and Julia's, ahead was the bathroom, and to the left and down, hers. The floors were bare, save for a thick layer of dust, and overhead, the single light fixture peered emptily down at her, like an all-seeing eye. Stop being such a baby. There's nothing to be scared of. Right. Nothing at all. She went the rest of the way and stepped tentatively into her room. 2 large side-by-side windows framed by vegetation looked out onto the side yard and a neighbor's house beyond. Bright sunshine soaked every square inch, and for that, Megan was thankful. As far as bedrooms went, it was kind of on the bland side. There was a closet on her right, door firmly closed, and an electrical outlet to the left. It wasn't much to look at, but as she floated through it, she could see all the possibilities within. Pink walls, a desk by the window for drawing and doing homework, a big, comfy bed against the wall, and, oh, that built-in bookshelf Tom mentioned would look great. In the closet, something thumped. The smile that had begun to lift Megan's face drained away, and she halted mid-step. Maybe it was... Now her chest clenched, and her fists curled reflexively to her breast. There was nothing, she told herself. Just Tom or Julia moving around on the first floor. As if to confirm her suspicions, the sound came yet again, and this time the door shook in its frame, as if whatever was inside was trying to get out. Okay, that wasn't Tom or Julia. It was a ghost, a vampire, some other equally horrifying third option. She didn't know, but her legs were already carrying her toward the door, and her heart fluttered. Oh no, I've seen way too many horror movies to fall for this one. She tried to wrench away, but an unseen force tugged at the front of her dress, drawing her forward, and her feet refused her brain's frantic demands to stop. Abruptly, the atmosphere was different. Heavier, darker, charged and crackling like the air before a violent summer storm. Just a moment ago, the space was warm with sunlight. Now, in the twinkling of an eye, it was inexplicably cold. At the door, she stopped and looked up at it, feeling much smaller and vulnerabler than usual. She sucked quick, grasping breath through flaring nostrils, and brushed her teeth worriedly over her bottom lip. Every instinct she had screamed at her to run, but she could only watch, helplessly, as her arm reached shakily out and her fingers closed around the burnished brass knob. She turned the handle, and something shoved the door open from the inside, ripping it from her hand. A black mass with blazing eyes and sharp teeth hurled itself at her, and a high, skull-cracking scream dislodged from her throat. She staggered back and fell on her butt with a breathless umph, every muscle tensing for attack. Instead, the creature screeched out the door, and a moment later, Julia cried out in alarm nearby. A moment later, just as Megan started to cry, Julia rushed into the room, her eyes big with worry. "Are you okay?" she asked as she knelt and took Megan into her arms. "Did it scratch you?" Megan shook her head, trying hard to get a grip on herself and largely succeeding. Her heart blasted into her ribs with such power it ached, and the cold terror in the pit of her belly washed through her like sludge. She recalled the brief glimpse she'd gotten of the creature's face, and trembled like a small, frightened animal.
What was that?
"A cat," Tom said, having come in without Megan noticing. "A hissing, spitting, feral cat." Just a cat. Relief came over Megan like a soothing tide. For a second there, she thought it was a girl-eating monster.
What was it doing in the closet?
She asked, her voice still not entirely steady.
The door was closed.
Frowning, Tom went over and leaned into the closet, looking up. "There's a hole in the ceiling," he sighed in a tone of defeat. He turned away and closed the door behind him. "Must have gotten into the attic and come through when it heard you walking around."
Where is it now?
Julia asked and brushed her fingers comfortingly through Megan's hair. Tom shrugged. "It's somewhere."
Well, go get it. God knows what it has. What if it bites Megan?
Sighing, Tom slumped his shoulders. He looked like he wanted to argue, but instead he took a deep, resolute breath. "All right," he said. "You two stay here." With that, he disappeared, and as Julia continued to console her, Megan made up her mind. She did not like this house. Part 3. The boy hated summer. Striding down the sidewalk flanking Elm, his hands shoved into the pockets of his black hoodie and his head defensively lowered, he fumed with 2 months' worth of pent-up loathing and frustration, the length of his step increasing as his mind wandered farther afield until he was practically goose-stepping like a Nazi in an old newsreel. He was blind to the houses lining the way, their antiquated facades stately and calm. He was blind to the occasional car passing into the street. He was so wrapped up in the rage coursing through him that he wasn't even aware that he was sweating and panting for air. 12, almost 13, and tall for his age, with lank black hair, sallow skin that never seemed to flush, and flat, listless eyes that stared through you rather than at you. Cody Millers was the most hated boy in Rossville. His father hated him, his mother hated him, the other kids at Rossville Middle hated him, and even the adults in town hated him. They whispered among themselves about how bad he was, even though he'd never done anything wrong. When someone broke into the school last year after hours and slicked the hallway floors with lard from the kitchen, he was the first and only kid Principal Stone questioned. When someone burned down Old Man Johnson's chicken coop at the beginning of this summer, he caught the blame, even though he was home that night. His mother knew that, but his father, passed out drunk, was convinced he snuck out and punished him with his belt. Mom didn't even say anything. She just let it happen like she always did. "The boy's not right," he overheard Mr. Garthy, the barber, say once. "You could see it in his eyes." And that was one of the nicer things they said about him. They acted like he was some kind of crazy madman who was always one step away from hurting someone. And you know what? These days, after all the hell he caught at home, all the times the kids called him names and shoved him into lockers, all the whispers, all the stares, all the bullshit. After all of that, maybe he was one step away from hurting someone. Every day, the gaseous ball of anger always simmering in his chest burned a little hotter, growing a little bigger. Sometimes, as he lay in bed at night and listened to his father tearing down the house in one of his wanton rages, he imagined himself hurting the people in town, starting with the kids he went to school with, and ending with Dad. He never allowed himself to think too deeply on the topic, because if he did, it would disturb him. In his heart, he didn't want to hurt anyone. He just wanted to be normal, like everyone else. The other kids at school, even the geeks, had friends. He had nothing. It was all too easy to envy them. By now, though, he didn't. He didn't even hate them. At once, being outcasted hurt, but now he was used to it. As long as they left him alone, he was fine. Most did, but some didn't. Like Zeke Harper. Zeke was just as big a prick as he'd expect the captain of the football team to be. Toned and handsome with brown hair and perfect teeth, he made the lives of everyone below him on the social food chain miserable. But Cody was his favorite target. At lunch, Zeke would walk behind him and accidentally spill his tray down his back. Whoops, sorry, Miller. And whenever Cody had to get up and walk past him in class, he always stuck his foot out, making him trip. Oh, and how everyone laughed. Was it really still funny after the 50,000th time? Telling didn't work. Zeke's dad was the sheriff, and everyone knew sheriffs play favorites with their kids. Even if Sheriff Harper didn't, everyone else did. Rossville, like many small towns across the country, was obsessed with football. Every Friday night from September to December, everyone crowded the high school athletic field to watch the Raptors play, and every Saturday, their exploits were splashed across the front page of the Rossville Review in bold black and white. Middle school ball wasn't as important as high school ball, but the kids on the team were still revered as minor celebrities, and Zeke was the star of the show. One day, they said, he'd go all-state, whatever that meant. The teachers let him get away with everything. The principal let him get away with everything. And everyone in town just loved how wholesome and all-American he was. They didn't see the side of him that Cody did. But you know what? They didn't want to see it, so they never would. It was probably him who broke into the school and torched that coop. In fact, Cody would bet money on it. Zeke Harper and the others weren't what bothered him today, however. It was summer. Most kids loved being out of school for 2.5 months, but not Cody, because as bad as school was, being at home with his parents was even worse. Dad worked the night shift at the Tyson plant in Harrisonburg Monday through Thursday, and the rest of the week he was home, sitting in his recliner, sucking down one beer after another, and cultivating his own anger. Anger because they were poor, anger because Cody existed, anger over nothing at all. No matter where Cody went in the house or what he did, Dad would eventually track him down and start badgering him, picking apart his every move and criticizing every little thing. Shutting a door too hard, flushing the toilet, opening the door to go outside and letting the AC out. Mom was just there, like a piece of furniture. She took pills from an orange bottle with no label, and Cody was beginning to think they weren't from her doctor. Since having peaceful days at home was almost impossible during the summer, Cody spent most of his time out. He walked the trails crisscrossing the forest surrounding the park, sat by the river and thought, and wandered the streets of town like a lost spirit. If he found enough change on the ground, he'd go to the arcade, even though all the games sucked and the guy who ran it, Mel, was a jerk. If Cody got a soda or a hot dog, Mel would shout the order to his sole cook.
"It's for the future school shooter."
Every once in a while, Zeke and some of his cronies would drift in just to pick on him, then leave. And if there were other kids in, they stared at him and whispered to each other. It was almost as bad as being at home. One of his favorite places was the library. It was cool, quiet, and always empty, save for people using the free computer terminals or old ladies trawling for Danielle Steele novels. No one ever bothered him there, so he'd stay for hours, just sitting in one of the overstuffed chairs in the reading nook and paging through magazines. A few times he set out an idle mission to find the oldest book there, but got bored and gave up every time. His absolute favorite place was the abandoned house on Chestnut Street. There was something about the place that pulled him, like steel to a magnet. If he set out from his own house with no destination in mind, his feet would carry him the 8 blocks to Chestnut of their own accord. He didn't know why the house attracted him so, but it did, and the closer he got to it, the more he could feel its presence in the air. Waves of power like those emanating from a transformer, calling to him, beckoning him, dragging him ever to it. A few times he crawled in through a broken basement window and walked aimlessly from floor to floor with bated breath, the certainty that something was going to happen weighing down his stomach like a pile of rocks. The feeling was strong in the back bedroom on the 2nd floor, the one looking into the neighbor's yard. The air was colder than it was everywhere else, and the wind, when it blew in the eaves, sounded like a stir of whispers. The place creeped him out, but the compulsion to trod its floors and know its secrets compelled him as surely as a pyromaniac's obsession with fire. He wouldn't go there at night, though. Never at night. Presently, Cody crossed Elm and started down Birch, his body on autopilot and his mind far away. The houses here were smaller and shabbier, their lawns not as well kempt as the ones on Elm. Car parts and trash littered a few, and in one, a fat woman in a bikini sunned herself next to an inflatable pool where 3 toddlers squealed and splashed each other. Cody stared down at his rotting Nikes and nibbled his bottom lip. The house was 2 blocks away, but he could already sense it, and his step subconsciously quickened. When he got there, he'd go in through the window and probably sit in the middle of the living room with his back to the wall. There was a perfect corner where 2 walls met that was out of sight from any window. He could log his phone onto someone's Wi-Fi. Unsuspecting van wasn't password protected, but it also wasn't very strong, and have complete and total peace. Except for the maddening urge to climb the stairs and follow the whispering wind. 10 minutes later, Cody turned right and followed the gravel alley running along the backyards of the house on Chestnut. Tall stockade fences flanked the road, and clusters of trash cans waited for tomorrow's pickup. Flies buzzing around them like planes landing and taking off. The stench penetrated the misty fog in his brain, and he wrinkled his nose. He came to the house and stopped. An orange and white U-Haul was backed up to the gate, its cab blocking the street. A puke-green Prius and a red Dodge Caravan was parked beside it, the latter's back hatch standing open. Cody missed a step, then lowered his head and hurried past, his mind reeling. Was someone moving in? That shouldn't surprise him. That's what houses are for, isn't it? But it did, and even before he reached Chestnut, his chest twanged with loss. He crossed the street and cut west, back the way he had come, and stopped directly across from the front porch. A woman in black slacks and a white blouse pushed up to her tippy toes to hang a potted plant from one of the beams, and a girl with glasses and blonde hair in a ponytail stood dutifully by, holding another. Cody stuck his bottom lip sullenly out and blew a puff of air that stirred his bangs. His soul cried out for the house, like a dehydrated man for cool, blessed water, but instead he wheeled around and stalked off, his hands curling into fists. Great. Some dumb family took his house away. What's next? His bedroom at home, too. His anger was short-lived. A block from the house, it drained away, and he deflated. I'll go to the library, he thought with a sigh. Part 4. When he happened to drive by Millie Buford's old house and saw new people moving in, Bill Harper knew it was going to be a bad day. "Ah, shit," he muttered to himself as he slowed his squad car to a crawl. A man with sandy hair and glasses pushed a mower through the tangled front lawn, and a girl with glasses helped a woman wearing a white blouse pull weeds from beside the foundation. Another man, shaved head and wearing a gray tank top and camo cargo shorts, carried boxes from a big U-Haul and sat them on the porch, where a giant pile of crap had accumulated. Tables, chairs, a reading lamp, and bulging plastic totes covered in Sharpie. Kitchen, living room, bedroom. Something cold and slick turned over in Bill's stomach, and the taste of bile suddenly coated the back of his throat. Spinning the wheel, Bill swung down Ridgecrest, which fringed the yard, and craned his neck to see better. The CB on the dashboard squawked, but he ignored it. Damn thing could wait. Aside from the two men, the woman, and the girl, there didn't seem to be anyone else. He let up on the gas even more and came to a rolling stop, one hand tightening on the wheel and the other lying on top of his considerable thigh, fingers drumming an edgy tempo. The man with the glasses reached the chain-link fence separating the yard from the sidewalk and turned the mower around. He looked up, and their eyes met. Even ensconced in his cruiser, even wearing the gun and golden badge that imbued him with endless power and commanded the respect and deference of everyone he met, Bill, all 250 pounds of him, felt naked, exposed. He whipped his eyes away and accidentally laid on the grass. The car surged forward with a squeal of tires and the belt locked hard against his chest, squeezing a gasp from his lungs like toothpaste from a tube. He stamped the brakes and slammed back against the seat. The man behind the mower watched him bemusedly, and Bill sighed. After all that, he'd better get out and say something, or else it'd look strange. Damn it. Stupid goddamn house. He was a grown man who could handle anything. Anything. Except for 625 Chestnut Street. Just looking at it made his heart beat faster, and whenever he drove by, he had the uncanny feeling of being watched, as though the thing inside were staring out at him, seeing through joists, plaster, metal, and years. That was stupid, he told himself, but he felt it anyway. He went out of his way to avoid that house. If he needed to get to the other side of town, he took every other street he could, even if it turned a 5-minute jaunt into a 15-minute trek. When he did pass it, he kept his eyes straight ahead and his mind firmly on other matters. Taxes, reports, what Amanda was making for dinner that night, his son Zeke's grades. They were good, a little too good. Even then, a shiver never failed to shimmy down his spine. All the kids said it was haunted, and they weren't far off. They weren't far off at all. Why the hell were people moving in anyway? Last he heard, Bobby Buford, who took it over after his mom died, was having trouble finding a buyer. Bill went to school with Bobby, and for a time they were good friends. Then something happened, and the relationship went out the window. Most people born and raised in Rossville tended to stay in Rossville. Law of averages or some damn thing. Bobby, though, Bobby left right out of high school, packed his old Honda up, and let out that very day. Bill saw him heading out of town. It looked like he was fleeing. 3 years ago, Bobby's mother, Millie, sweet old lady who always handed out full-size chocolate bars at Halloween, fell down the basement stairs and lay there for 3 days, moaning and crying weakly out for help before the neighbor found her. Bill was the first one on the scene, and even if he lived to be 1,000, he'd never forget her face. Contorted in misery, mouth open and drooping, eyes cloudy white. She talked out of her head before the ambulance got there, said something pushed her, told him it talked to her at night, told him it mentioned his name. Horror came over him like a splash of cold water, and he almost ran out screaming his head off. Later on, he got a hold of himself. She was dehydrated, concussed, and senile to begin with. She was just rambling. Just rambling. Every so often, though, as he lay down next to Amanda and struggled to shut his mind down to sleep, he wondered if he was wrong. What if Millie Buford was telling the truth? What if there really was something in that house? What if it pushed her down those stairs just to lure him inside? Right now, in broad daylight, the sheriff of Rossville shuddered. After Millie died in the hospital 3 days later, Bobby came back to town from Florida, where he owned a construction company. He didn't stay long and didn't talk to anyone. Andy Miller said he saw him down in the Save-A-Lot, and when Bobby saw him, he went pale, turned around, and rushed off. The house wasn't like something Bobby wanted to deal with, and it showed in how long it sat empty. Bill was just starting to think it was going to stay that way. And now this. He should have gone in there when he had the chance. He should have gone in and taken that damn thing out. He committed a few times, but he always found an excuse for backing out. As much as he might say he didn't believe in ghosts, all he had to do was think of Millie Beaufort, lying at the foot of those stairs, soaked in her own piss and shit, raving about spirits whispering his name, and he shuddered. Inhaling through his nose, Bill looked up at the house. In the light of day, it was entirely unremarkable, like a dozen other houses in town. Wood siding, half-rounds trimming the second-floor exterior, green roof, white trim gone grey with grime. Not so scary, is it? No, it wasn't. The thing inside, though. Bill quashed that thought with the ruthlessness of a communist dictator putting down a rebellion. In the yard, the man with the glasses pushed the mower aside, his eyes never wavering from the car, as though it were a venomous bug that would bite the moment he looked away. The one with the shaved head carried a box up the porch steps, sat it next to another, and returned to the truck, completely oblivious to Bill's presence. Goosebumps raked Bill's arms, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. The sensation of being watched crept through him. Drive away. Just forget it and drive away. You're the law. Who cares what they think? Just get away. Bill was a lot of things, and stubborn was one of them. He'd be damned if he let himself get so spooked over a house that he ran away. For that reason, and that reason only, he threw off his belt, flung the door open, and got out. The perfume of mangled grass seasoned the still air, and blazing hot sunshine enveloped Bill like the fires of hell. He slammed the door, hitched his belt up, and walked slowly around the side of the car, approaching the fence. The man in glasses came over to meet him, and the woman and the little girl, kneeling next to each other, turned their heads to watch, a look of mistrust crossing the mother's face. What the hell was he going to say? Welcome to Rossville, folks. That's when he caught it. The U-Haul. On the other side of the fence, the man stopped, his forehead knitting in confusion. His blue eyes flickered with trepidation, and Bill focused on that, and not the malignant house behind him, leering forth like a goddamn pedophile.
Afternoon,
Bill said with a curt nod.
Good afternoon, officer,
the man said cautiously. Can I help you? The other man stood by the U-Haul's tailgate, watching the proceeding like a specter to an Old West gunfight. Bill's eyes darted to him, then the house, then back to glasses.
You moving trucks blocking the street,
he said in his best cordial tone.
Can I get you to move it, please?
Glasses shot a quick glance over his shoulder as if to confirm the truck was, indeed, blocking the street.
It's almost empty,
the other man called.
2 more minutes.
Bill didn't care whether the truck was blocking Alley Lane or not, but being here, next to this house, and in front of these people, he was uncharacteristically tense. Backing down too easily might look suspicious.
I understand there ain't much room,
he said.
I just want other folks to get back if they have to.
Glasses turned and surveyed the lot, and Bill leaned over the fence.
Just cut it a little to the left.
The other man, having heard, disappeared, and a second later, the U-Haul's engine roared into life. While he maneuvered the truck out of the way, Bill looked up at the house again. Curtains fluttered in a second-story window, and his stomach turned. Just a draft, that was all.
Just moving in?
He asked mid-conversation.
Yes,
the man said. The woman and little girl were coming over, and Bill sneaked a glance at them from the corner of his eye. He'd never seen either one of them before, and was sure of it, but the girl was oddly familiar.
I'm Tom Herriman. This is my wife, Julia, and our daughter, Megan.
The woman offered a guarded smile, and Bill gave her a nod as curt as the first. 12 at a glance. Megan was short and petite, her bare arms slender and her knees knobby. She wore a floral print dress, big glasses, and her hair in a ponytail. Déjà vu swept Bill, and a puzzled frown touched the corners of his lips.
I'm Sheriff Harper,
Bill said.
It's nice to meet you folks.
He paused and tried to think of something more to say. Normally he was at ease with anyone he met, even if they were a hardened criminal who'd shiv his guts out just as soon as he looked at him. But right now, he was antsy. He shifted his bulk from one foot to the other and crossed his arms over his chest. then put his hands on his hips.
You too,
Tom said.
I'm really sorry about blocking the street.
The U-Haul rolled forward, swung to the right, then backed up, the tail lights blinking. It went forward again, turned even more, then came back a second time.
Like I said, there isn't much room,
Bill said.
The streets around here weren't made for trucks that big, even though sometimes you need them.
The engine shut off and the man jumped out. The front end still jutted out a couple of feet into the road, but it was good enough for Bill.
That should do it,
Bill said.
It was nice meeting y'all.
You too, Sheriff,
Tom said. Nodding one final nod, Bill turned around, went back to his car, and slid in behind the wheel. The feeling of being watched was stronger now, and his heart throbbed like an abscessed tooth. He had the strongest urge to look in the rearview mirror, but resisted. If he saw something staring out of that second-floor window, he'd keel over dead. Without putting on his seatbelt, Bill started the car, put it in drive, and pulled away from the fence. He didn't realize he was holding his breath until his lungs began to ache 2 blocks later. He let it out in a shaky rush and licked his lips. All right, well, 625 isn't empty anymore. That put him in the hot seat again. What now? First order of business was seeing Joey Vandermeer. After that, maybe the others too. Andy Miller, Frank Stone, and Dave Caswell. Frank was the principal at the junior high, and Andy worked the graveyard shift at the Tyson plant in Harrisonburg. He could catch them any old time he wanted, but not Dave. He drove big rigs up and down the East Coast and stayed gone sometimes for weeks on end. He'd have to stop by Helen Meyer's boarding house and see if he was in. A voice crackled over the CB, bringing him out of his fatigue.
Bill? You there?
Terry Bradford, Rossville's sole dispatcher, a tall, lanky woman with short black hair, she comprised a good 40% of the town police department, with Bill and his deputies Chuck and Mark rounding out the rest. Grabbing the handset from its cradle, Bill depressed the talk button on the side and lifted it to his mouth.
Yeah, go ahead.
Got a call from Edith Johnson,
Terry said, her long-suffering inflection thinly veiled.
She says someone spray-painted something on her garage.
Every small town, Bill reckoned, had at least one resident old biddy who lived in her window looking for reasons to phone the police. Edith Johnson was Rossville's and had been going on 20 years. 78 and frail with bushy brown hair that refused to go gray even as her face withered. Edith was the bane of Bill's existence. She called the station at least once a day complaining about cars going too fast on her street. It's a 25, and that Tundra was going at least 30. Teenagers walking past, they're up to no good, I just know it. One time, she even called on the birds in her bushes outside for making too much noise. I don't know animal control's number, so I'm calling you. Bill tried to be patient with her. Her husband died 10 years back, and her adult children never visited, so she was lonely, and her arthritic knees kept her from being able to move around. Some days, however, he could hit her.
All right,
he said into the CV.
I'll take a look.
5 minutes later, he pulled into the driveway of Edith Johnson's one-story ranch on Rossdale Street. Potted plants crowded the front porch, and a line of pink plastic flamingos marched across the front lawn, presided over by a gazing ball on a faux marble pedestal. A flower bed edged the house. A gnome with ruddy cheeks favored Bill with a knowing smirk that made him inexplicably uneasy. Edith, clad in a pink button-up blouse and white pants, was already making her way towards him as he got out, her posture stooped and her steps shuffling. Brown age spots dotted her skeletal arms, lending her the appearance of an overripe banana, and Bill could smell the aspartame before she was even upon him.
He defaced my garage,
she said in a low, trembling outrage. Bill glanced at the big roll-top door fronting the detached garage. Nothing.
Who did?
He asked.
That Miller boy,
she spat. Oh, Cody Miller, Andy's son. If every little town had an Edith, it has a Cody, too. A guy, or gal, who always takes the blame when something goes wrong. Bill wouldn't lie. Cody was a little different, but to the best of his knowledge, he'd never actually done anything to anyone. People had a way of scapegoating him that, well, wasn't very fair. See, His old man was, to put it nicely, a piece of shit. He drank, smacked his wife around, and was responsible for almost every bad thing to happen in Rossville during his youth. Someone egged your windows, Andy Miller. Someone broke into your house and stole $50 from your sock drawer, Andy Miller. Someone did donuts in your front yard. Guess who? In high school, he, Bill, Joey, and the others would cruise around, drink beer, and chase girls. Boys will be boys. Only for Andy, 17 never ended. Bill got serious about life, Dave got serious, even Joey to an extent. But not Andy. Instead, he got serious about booze. In the 15 years since school last let out, he'd been arrested 24 times for DUI, driving on a suspended, domestic battery, a possession of coke, possession of pot, speeding, reckless driving. He was a man with a family and a steady job, but in a way, he was still that wild teenager, only more bitter and hateful. Or something. Bill wasn't a psychologist. Andy was bad news, and that was that. Unfortunately, that reputation rubbed off on Cody. The adults were leery of him, and no doubt told their kids he was a bad seed, and the kids picked up on him because kids are like a school of piranha. They move as a pack and descend on the odd man out. It didn't help that Cody looked like he was always plotting a murder. Dark, stormy eyes, strained frown. That was likely on account of everyone mistreating him, which made Bill feel bad for him. But those are the types you gotta watch. The most popular and well-adjusted kids, like his own boy, Zeke, aren't the ones shooting up schools. It's the bullied ones, like Cody.
How do you know it was Cody Miller?
Bill asked now. Edith Johnson's eyes narrowed to reptilian slits.
Right before I called, he walked by. I was standing on the porch, he didn't even look at me, like he was guilty or something.
That doesn't mean he is, Bill said.
It does in my book,
she said in a tone that closed the matter. Bill sighed. When she made up her mind, nothing could shake her. You'd have better luck changing a Democrat's politics or an evangelical's religion.
Where is he?
He asked.
Follow me.
She led him around the side of the garage. A chain-link fence divided her yard from the neighbors, and the unshorn grass reached nearly to Bill's knees.
There,
she said indignantly. Fuck you, old bitch, was splayed across the shabby vinyl siding in white. Bill put his hands on his hips and prodded the inside of his bottom lip with his tongue. Well, someone indeed spray-painted Edith Johnson's garage. But who? She swore it was Cody Miller, but her evidence was tenuous at best. Bill was inclined to think it wasn't him, but he couldn't rule it out.
What are you gonna do?
Edith demanded. Not much of anything, Bill silently decided.
Well, I'll talk to him. That's really all I can do.
Are you gonna arrest him?
She pushed. Bill was beginning to lose his patience.
If I find probable cause, yes. If not, it's your word against his.
Well, my word counts for more.
No, actually, it didn't. Her word meant crap to him. In fact, with the way she was always bothering him, she almost deserved this. Cry wolf long enough, a wolf's gonna show up, and you'll have no one to blame but yourself.
I'll talk to him,
he repeated, starting back to the car. She followed at a gait, bitching the whole way.
Are you just gonna leave it there?
She asked disbelievingly. Bill was behind the wheel with the window down, the key in the ignition. He had half a mind to gun the engine and speed off. What did she think he was, a cleaning service?
I'll send Mark out to do that,
he said. Mark, the junior-most man on the force, could use a good punishment. He came in late too much for Bill's liking, and that was easier than writing him up.
At least he'll do that.
She sniffed. Bill bit his tongue.
You have a nice day, Miss Johnson.
Backing into the street, he turned right and put Edith Johnson behind him. Now, for Joey Vandermeer.
Part 5.
At Main, Bill took a left and navigated past Town Square, a tiny commons dominated by a statue of Josiah Ross, Rossville's founder. A group of teens occupied a bench facing the fountain, and an old man tossed chunks of bread to the ducks that nestled there. The old county courthouse stood against the blue sky, its dome putting Bill in mind of a zit. When Rossville was established in 1784, it was the seat of Appalachian County, which in those days consisted of unspoiled wilderness and maybe 2 towns. For 100 years, Rossville was the biggest community in the region until a sawmill opened in Elk Park. In 1901, the seat was moved there, and the courthouse was partitioned between the police department, the Town Historical Society, and several other local agencies. The station was housed across 3 rooms in the basement. The plumbing was ancient, the heat hardly worked, and some people swore it was haunted. Like the house on Chestnut. Bill's stomach rolled, and a grimace rented his face. Boys will be boys, he thought. Yeah. Outside town, low, gentle hills rolled back from the road and gave way to dense forest above. In the west, pasture land stretched for as far as the eye could see. An 18-wheeler pulling a load of timber rounded a bend ahead and screamed past, making the cruiser rock. The ball of nerves in Bill's stomach tightened little by little as the highway dipped and rose. By the time he reached his destination, he was seething like a cauldron over a roaring fire, and a headache twinged above his right eye. Sitting on a lofty ridge like a majestic ship at sail and guarded by an ornate wrought iron fence, Vandermeer's state looked more like a palace than a home, with its ramparts, marble-columned portico, and braggadociously tall windows. An exquisitely crafted fountain stood before it like a modern marvel, and a tennis court and a swimming pool bookended the main building. Every time Bill saw it, he couldn't help wondering what anyone needed with so much house. 15 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, a conservatory, a library. Hell, there was even a ballroom where Joey's parents used to throw lavish parties for July 4th, Halloween, Christmas, and just because. At its peak, long before Joey was born, the Vandermeer clan numbered 8, making the house too big even for them. Once, Bill was a frequent visitor here. He swam in the pool, attended every party, and rode 4-wheelers on the trails crisscrossing the woods behind the house. Of all his friends, Joey was the best. Fun and charismatic. He had a certain aura that pulled you to him. Bill imagined JFK had it, and maybe Reagan, too. Greatness, that's what it was, being around Joey Vandermeer. With his dazzling smile and twinkling eyes was being in the presence of greatness. You'd expect someone like him to be a jerk, but instead he was a friend to everyone, and used to bring the entire class out here for pool parties and socials and the like. Then, something happened. And suddenly, Bill didn't think so highly of him. Then again, he didn't think so highly of himself, either. Slowly, he turned up the horseshoe drive, then drove past the main gate and up the hill, the house growing bigger the closer he got. 5 years ago, Joey's folks died in a car wreck, and he inherited everything. The house, the fortune, and the staff. He lived alone in the echoing halls, save for an elderly maid and the gardener. Billy didn't know what he did with himself anymore, and he didn't particularly care. He couldn't say he hated Joey, but he sure as hell didn't like him, and he contrived to avoid him just the same as he did the house on Chestnut Street. Bill parked at the bottom of the stairs leading up to the double doors and killed the engine. The house was so big it blotted out the sun, and shadows filled the world. He unbuckled his belt and got out. The afternoon had quickly turned humid and wrapped itself around him like a sodden blanket, drawing sweat from every pore. He scanned the sky for storm clouds, but didn't see any. Being so high, Vandermeer Estate commanded a sweeping view of the valley below and the hazy mountains on the horizon. For a moment, Bill contemplated it, stalling, then climbed the steps. Before he could knock, the door opened and the maid appeared, a short, frumpy Mexican woman with steely gray hair and glasses. She'd been here as long as Bill could remember, and would probably be here long after he was gone, an eternal fixture like one of the columns.
"Afternoon,"
he said with a nod.
"Joey here?"
Come in.
She said in lightly accented English. She moved aside, and he stepped into the foyer. The highly polished tile floor glinted in the warm overhead light like the placid surface of a sun-dappled sea, and the oak paneling glowed, as if with their own inner suffusion. A staircase with a forest green runner and intricate golden leaf design in place of spindles led up to the second floor, where a railing guarded the shadowy front hall. Paintings, landscapes, and watercolors dotted the walls, and a lamp shone from an end table at the foot of the stairs. Bill followed the maid into a richly appointed sitting room with gilded woodwork and a big fireplace. A green rug with a fringed edge covered the hardwood floor, and soft music drifted theatrically from an unseen source. Brass lamps on the wall provided low, ambient light, and deep tranquility lay over the room, immediately taking the edge off of Bill's nerves. He sat on a leather wingback sofa with a weary grunt, and the maid rushed off to find Joey. Alone, he let his eyes travel around the room. A liquor cabinet stood against one wall, ready to service thirsty guests, and tall ferns huddled in the corners. Where the panels ended, staid wallpaper with tiny flower shapes took over, and Bill idly wondered if it was original or not. It hadn't changed in all the time he'd been coming here, and he bet it was at least 100 years old. Everything here probably was. A house like Vandermeer's estate is more like a museum than a home, all things preserved in a vacuum of time and sedation. His eyes fell on a portrait of a stern-faced old man with icy blues hanging over the mantel, his steely gaze boring into Bill like lasers. Louis Vandermeer, the first of the current line. In Germany, his people owned an Alpine inn. He came to America in the 1870s, found his fortune in the railroad, and died in 1929 as one of the richest men in the country. If that wasn't the American dream, Bill didn't know what was. He expected to wait a while, but after only a few minutes, Joey came in through a door at the other side of the room. Tall and muscular, with curly blonde hair, blue eyes, and a strong, angular jaw, Joey resembled his ancestor only passingly. Clad in white tennis shorts, a white polo that stretched tight across his toned chest, and white sneakers, he looked far younger than his 35 years, an effect cemented by his boyish grin and the mischievous light in his eyes. His presence dominated the room, and even knowing everything he did about him, Bill felt that familiar magnetic pull.
"Hey, you Billy boy,"
Joey said affably as he walked up. He sank into his armchair, catty-corner to the sofa, leaning forward, and clasped his hands between his knees.
"Do you want to frisk me?"
Bill chuckled despite himself.
"Nah, not this time."
He shifted restlessly, and Joey watched him. He didn't look much like Louis Vandermeer, but had the same penetrating stare, and it made Bill uncomfortable.
"Came to tell you something." "Whatever it is, I didn't do it,"
Joey choked.
"Honest."
Actually, he did, and sometimes Bill thought he did other things too.
"Well, it's about,
He looked around to confirm they were alone, then lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper.
Someone moved into Millie Buford's old house."
Joey favored him with a blank stare of a man who'd just been given a critical piece of information that had absolutely no bearing on his life.
"Oh, okay," Joey said. "Well, if you want to form a welcome committee, I could chip in an Oreo pie and maybe some of Pop's cigars. They've been rotting in a box for 50 years, so I don't know how they taste." "This is serious," Bill said soberly. "You and I both know what's in that house."
Letting out a patronizing sigh, Joey sat back in the chair.
"We don't know anything. Bobby could have—" "He didn't," Bill cut in. "And you know it."
Joey's face darkened so briefly that Bill might have thought he was mistaken were it anyone else. Not many people knew what lurked beneath Joey Vandermeer's amicable facade, but Bill did. He'd seen it. Just as quickly as it came, it was gone, and Joey looked hurt, as though Bill had forced a painful memory on him at gunpoint.
"Look," he started, "I really don't want to talk about this, okay? You're jumping at shadows here. So what someone moved in?"
Here, he spread his hands in a gesture of bafflement.
"I do,"
Bill said, starting to get hot under the collar. Joey had always been dismissive about this. Oh, at first he was contrite and self-effacing, but then he started to act like it never happened.
"Because you're paranoid,"
Joey said.
"You're damn right I am," Bill replied. "I've been paranoid for going on 20 goddamn years."
His voice raised with his passion, and he lowered it again.
"You aren't."
Even as the words left his mouth, he knew the answer.
"No,"
Joey said tightly, the light, buoyant tone of a moment ago replaced by cold, serrated edge.
"Then I suggest you follow my example. You're a cop, Bill. You know damn well what happens to men who let their paranoia override their senses. Bill grated. He did know. He knew all too well. Softening his tone, sounding friendly even, Joey said, I get why you're upset. I really do. Just don't worry about it. What if they find? Then they find it, Joey said with a shrug. You come out, do your thing, then that's it. We're home free.
Bill sighed. He didn't want it to happen that way. Joey might think being sheriff gave him a blank check to do whatever the hell he wanted, but it didn't. If he didn't do things the way they were supposed to be done, the state police would be on him like bark on a tree. He said so, and Joey nodded in sympathy. That didn't feel quite genuine.
Okay, then do it by the book. Come on, Billy. We're home free.
Unless one of your clowns says something. His brow angled deliberately down, and Bill reflexively shook his head no. He wouldn't tell.
Then stop your worrying, Joey said with a grin. Go grab a donut and a cup of coffee, huh? You earned it, big guy.
Maybe Joey was right. Maybe he was just being paranoid.
All right,
he exhaled.
Yeah.
He pushed to his feet, and Joey stood with him. Together, they walked to the front door, Joey's hand resting on Bill's shoulder.
What you need is a vacation. When's the last time you took one?
On the porch, Bill thought.
I don't even remember. Probably the time we went to Atlantic City.
That was, what, 3 years ago?
Bill did the math, then nodded. Well, take another one, Joey said, and clapped him on the back. My treat. That made Bill laugh. We'll see.
As he drove away, Bill Harper's smile faded. My treat, my ass. It would be a cold day in hell before he accepted anything from Joey Vandermeer. A cold, cold, cold day. After dropping Kevin off at his house, Tom, Julia, and Megan went to the Home Depot for supplies. While Tom and Julia browsed, Megan wandered up and down the electrical aisle and breathed through her mouth because the sawdust choking the air hurt her nose. She stopped at a pin of plastic light switch covers and contemplated them with a thoughtful hum. There were all kinds, some of them in weird colors and shapes. Huh, wonder if they have any shaped like animals. She sifted through and found a pink and purple one that looked like a curved dolphin trying to kiss its own butt. Perfect. She found Tom and Julia in the paint section, the cart already overfull. She stood quietly aside and waited for them to be finished. She didn't really like asking for things from them because she didn't want to look like a greedy freeloader, but she really liked the light switch cover, so she'd break her own rule just this once.
Fine, Tom was saying. We'll go with baby blue.
It's the best blue, Julia said. Right, Megan? Megan nodded. It was, in fact.
What you got there?
Tom asked, and nodded at the dolphin. It's a cover switch, Megan explained, then hesitated. Can I have it? Tom held out his hand, and she gave it to him. Adjusting his glasses, he held it up to the light and studied it for a moment.
Huh,
he said, impressed.
That's pretty cool.
It's really neat, Megan said, impassioned like a defense lawyer pleading her case. And it'll look good in my room.
It would,
Tom agreed, and sat it in the cart. They picked up a few things from the lawn and garden section for the yard, then drove home through the weakened late afternoon light. They pulled into the driveway just past 6. Shadows filled the house's nooks and crannies, and the second-story windows glinted like excited eyes, an image that deeply unsettled Megan. Inside, with the lights blazing, it wasn't so bad, and after a while, she loosened up. First, she and Tom moved her bed, then she took a bath in the old clawfoot tub. It was really big, like almost big enough to swim in. After that, she, Tom, and Julia snuggled up on the couch and watched Frozen, her all-time favorite movie. 3/4 of the way through, she started to get sleepy, and right before the end, she dozed off with her head lolling against Tom's chest. She came groggily awake when he picked her up in his strong arms and cradled her like a baby, then drifted peacefully back off. She did not stir as he carried her up the darkened stairs, or when he laid her in bed, pecked her forehead, and tucked Mr. Bob in next to her. She was oblivious to it all, and thus passed her first night in the house on Chestnut Street.